We're continuing in our studies in the life of David. We have a wonderful chapter before us this evening. There is so much here of interest and of application, so many lessons. My title tonight is Leaving It with the Lord. Sometimes people say, I don't know what to do. I'm perplexed, I'm confused. I'm just going to leave it with the Lord. And then they don't. We don't. We fret, we get anxious, we try and take matters into our own hands. And I often say to people, if they ask or they comment on such things, leaving it with the Lord means leaving it. Leaving it to prayer, leaving it to faith, leaving it to trust, not fretting. If you've left it with the Lord, the problem, the dilemma, you need to leave it. Don't keep going back. Pray by all means. But leaving it means leaving it with the Lord. And I think that's an appropriate title for this evening. If there was to be a text to call out of this whole chapter we shall work through, particularly looking at David, not so much at Saul, it would be verse 4. The men of David said unto him, Behold, the day which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thy hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. And David arose, and he cuts off a piece, not of a skirt, but of the robe that Saul was wearing. Well, let's try and unpack this. If I was to take another text from outside, it would be a psalm that David wrote, Psalm 34, verse 19, and it's this verse. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivereth them out of them all. Yet again, David is going to be delivered. Well, just to recap, David has been anointed by Samuel. He is going to be king. But in 1 Samuel 24, he's not yet king. He's serving that long apprenticeship. He doesn't even know when the date will come. And it was difficult. Sometimes you know something's going to happen, but you don't know when. David didn't know when he would be king. He's learning faith. He's learning trust. David has been anointed not just to be king, but the Holy Spirit is upon him. And it's been taken from King Saul, and whilst Saul is king, he no longer has the blessing of the Holy Spirit upon him. Well, we've seen David's faith waver. We've seen him go to places and to people he shouldn't have gone to. But there in the cave, in Cave Adullam, there is a total turnaround. And as we noticed before, when David turned his attention away from himself and he turned it to these 400 misfits, these 400 indebted, discontented, discouraged people, David looks beyond his own four walls and he starts to become their captain. Then the Lord blesses David, and we see him rising and rising from that day onwards. Well, last time in 1 Samuel 23, we saw David remarkably delivered. If you remembered, Saul and his troops were on one side of the mountain, and David and his 400, maybe 600 by then, men were on the other side of the mountain, and you thought David was under pressure, and a messenger came. I think a heavenly messenger. And Saul, for once, goes and starts fighting the Philistines, as he should have been doing. But David, even though he wasn't the king, had been doing Saul's job. But just in the nick of time, the Lord pulls Saul away and David escapes. So we get to verse 1 of chapter 24. It came to pass, this is the link between Saul going to fight the Philistines and turning his attention back to David. David, my enemy. David, I've got to kill him. David, I must destroy him. He's a sick man in his mind. He's got such evil intentions because he sees David as a threat. David is no threat. David is waiting on the Lord. So it says here that it was told him, saying, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi, those caves. I know one or two of you have been to those caves around the Dead Sea, and there's a huge complex of caves. When you look at what this chapter says, David's got 600 men, and Saul comes with his men, and David is hiding in the back of the cave. Just imagine how big the caves were, the complex of caves, and they are there today. You can go to them. I'm told most of the tour guides in the area around the Dead Sea, they will take you to the place where they believe these caves actually were. And so David is in the wilderness of En-gedi, the place where the goats live and the sheep. And so Saul takes 3,000 men. 3,000. That's a lot of people to look for one man. 3,000 versus 600. He's outnumbered. You could do a study of this in the Word of God. How often the people of God are outnumbered. We are outnumbered. That doesn't matter. If the Lord is with us, if the Lord is on our side, numbers don't count for anything. And here, 3,000 men, and notice it says in verse 2 that they were chosen out of all Israel. They're represented across the tribes, it seems to suggest. And Saul comes, and he's got to destroy David in his mind. And he goes to seek David and his men. The jungle drums have beaten, and they've heard where he might be. And so he comes with 3,000 men, an elite force versus David's misfits. Again, there's a mismatch. 3,000 chosen men. David's men were not chosen at all. They were there by default, hiding in Cave Adullam. And he's going to make of them an army. And this army is going to be successful because the Lord is with them. The Lord takes the weak and the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And so this personal jealousy is turned into a national mission by King Saul. Well, Saul hasn't got everything in his favour because this terrain is known much more to David than it is to Saul. This is where David grew up. These areas, the hills, the caves, where the goats and the sheep live, David was far more at home. So it says in verse 3, and he came to the sheepcotes by the way. It's almost unfolding just like a story. But if you look behind the text, who's guiding Saul? Who's guiding David? How can they possibly meet in one cave? This is remarkable. God is providentially superintending that these two should meet together in a quite incredible way. The king is focused on finding David, and it says, verse 3, this is slightly curious. It's not amusing, but it's curious. Saul went in to cover his feet. He went to the toilet. That's what it literally means. He went to relieve himself. He went to the bathroom. And it seems that while he's there, he has an afternoon nap. He lies down, and in some way, David's at the back of the cave. He's hiding there with his men in the sides of the cave. And in comes Saul. And we can sort of read behind the text. One of David's men says, David, you wouldn't believe who's just come into the cave. It's Saul. And David says, no, surely not. Oh yes, it's Saul. And somehow Saul doesn't know what David's up to. Now, it may be that Saul had taken his robe off. It's not necessarily implied that Saul was asleep, but it could be. Saul's either wearing his robe and he falls asleep and has a nap, or he's taken his robe off and David cuts off a piece. It's not entirely clear in the text, but David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. Isn't this incredible? Yes, Saul is looking for David, but how they meet just at that time. This encounter has all been planned. This is the Lord's doing. And so, here's David, and he's going to have a crisis. He's going to have a crisis. What shall I do? Here's Saul. Do I listen to my men? Or do I listen to my conscience? We often have that, don't we? What should I do? Listen to opinion? Listen to the classroom? Listen to what my friend says? Or should I listen to the Lord and to conscience? Here's verse 4. The men of David said unto him, Behold, look, here is your gold-edged ticket. What you've wanted. Here is Saul. Behold, the Lord has said this, it's put in spiritual language, I will deliver thine enemy into thy hand, that thou mayest do to him as it seems good to thee. Should he follow the crowd? Should he listen to these men? Or should he do what's right? A crisis of conscience. Have you ever had that before? Should I do what's right? Or should I listen to others? We know what we should do, but we don't always do it. Well, David gets up and it says he arose and he cut off the skirt. I imagine it's just a bit at the bottom of the robe. Was Saul asleep? Don't know, but he does it privily, secretly, quietly, discreetly. I don't know how it happened, but Saul doesn't know that he's got his scissors out and cut off a piece of the garment. Well, has David done right or not? We shall find out. He cuts it off secretly. Notice that David's conscience is active, and he's worried about whether he should do something. But Saul has no active conscience at all. What a contrast between Saul and David. Saul doesn't mind if he's got murderous intent. David is even concerned that he shouldn't touch Saul. So he spares him. He could have taken his life, but he doesn't. Verse 5, it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him. Literally, inside David, there is this very uncomfortable feeling. Should I have done that? Should I have cut off a piece? I know I shouldn't have killed him, but should I even have touched his garment? Now, it's very interesting. Another study that you can do, the number of times garments are mentioned. You think back to Joseph and his garment, the multicoloured coat. Think back to Samuel. His mother made him a garment. And now Saul. Saul, back in 1 Samuel 15:27, has had part of his robe already taken from him. When Samuel anointed David, Saul had part of his garment taken off. A garment means so much more. The robe of a king is his office. It's his authority. And so when we read here that David begins to smote his heart because he had cut off Saul's skirt, it means a lot more. The sensitivity in David's heart is stirred. He has done something he should not have done. Not only should he not have killed him, but he shouldn't have touched his garment. The stirring of conscience. This is a true believer. David's heart within him is uncomfortable. He knows that to have touched the garment and to have cut something off is to touch the Lord's anointed. Yes, Saul doesn't have the Spirit of God upon him, but he's still the king. God has made him king, and he's still the king because the Lord hasn't moved the kingship to David. So David's heart is troubled. He's been rebellious in a small way, and that troubles him. Does sin trouble you? When you do what you shouldn't do? You see, the temptation here is to cut a corner. I don't just mean the corner of the robe, but David sees a shortcut to becoming the king. And he could have dealt with it then. But no, that's not God's way. We're not to take shortcuts. Even if we know what's going to happen, we are to trust the Lord for where and when and how. Those are not within our gift, and we could apply this in so many ways. We might have time later. Maybe in marriage. You want to get married and you have a desire to be married. Young people, could you take shortcuts and not wait on the Lord for the right person at the right time in the right way? What about other things in life? Taking things into our own control, taking matters into my control. David says, no, I shouldn't have done that. I should have waited on the Lord, his time, his place, his situation. And so he says to his men, verse 6, he says to them, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master. It's his enemy. But no, not to David. Because Saul is still the Lord's anointed, he calls him my master, the Lord's anointed. I shouldn't have stretched forth my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. And you can sort of embellish verse 7 slightly. He's still getting the men saying, no, take him, take him. And David constrains them. It's as though he stands between the men and Saul. And he says, no, I'm going to trust the Lord. So David stayed his servants with these words. He suffered them not to rise up against Saul. They wanted to deal with him as well. To be done with it. We won't have to hide in the caves anymore. If we take Saul now, you'll become king. Job done. No. David says, I will not cut corners. But Saul rose up. At the end of verse 7, it seems that Saul knows nothing about this. I can only imagine he's been in a dream or a trance or had a sleep. That's what we seem to think. And so he gets up and he goes out blissfully unaware that David is there with his men in the sides of the cave. It's extraordinary, isn't it? You couldn't make it up. And yet, this is the Lord's doing. And in this very incident, we're seeing how the Lord's people operate in a different way. David's men wanted to operate in a carnal way. I'll deal with it. I'll sort it out. Leave it with me. And David says, no, I'll leave it with the Lord. And I mean leave it. Verse 8, David also arose. What a dramatic incident in verse 8. Saul has gone out, presumably all his men with him, or maybe many of them, maybe some kept outside, I don't know, it doesn't say. And he calls after Saul. Presumably Saul's gone out a few hundred meters, and he shouts out and says, my Lord the King. Respect again, reverence. And Saul turns round. Look at the drama of this incident. And David stoops down with his face to the earth. What you did to a king in those days. You see, God has appointed authorities in this life. We may not like them, we may not agree with them, they may not be very good at their job, but David will respect those who the Lord has appointed. And that applies to kings and politicians and head teachers. It applies to officers in the church. David stoops down, and even though Saul is a dreadful king, he still must fall and respect the one that the Lord has kept in power for the time being. Verse 9, and David said to Saul, wherefore hearest thou men's words? I thought about that this afternoon. That would make a wonderful text on its own. Why do you listen to men? Why do you keep listening to men? They say to you lies. David seeks your hurt. That's not true at all. There's no evidence whatsoever for the fact that David is seeking the hurt of Saul. It's all in his mind. Why do you listen to men's words? You could expand that significantly. Verse 10, behold, this day thine eyes have seen that the Lord has delivered thee today into my hand. He doesn't yet know what's happened. That comes down in verse 11. Verse 10, some, my men, said I should kill you. I should destroy you. But mine eye, that's in italics, it's added in for emphasis, I have spared you, King Saul. Now you should know, I'm not against you. You've been listening to men's words. There's no substance to it whatsoever. I am respecting you. I'm not coming near you because you are the Lord's anointed. And I said I won't put forth my hand because he's the Lord's anointed. Now there's something else interesting going along here. In a lot of the Psalms, don't we read about vengeance, revenge? And David in the Psalms, quite often he says to the Lord, will you avenge the wicked? And you read that in isolation and you think David's a horrible man. He keeps asking for vengeance. Well, that's not entirely right, is it? What's happening is the actions of Saul need to be confronted. But David in this chapter is saying, I'm not the one to confront them. The Lord will avenge the wicked. He will turn them to face the consequences of their actions. There's a verse in Romans 12, verse 19. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. That's not unfair. What it's saying is God will judge, but he'll judge in his way, in his time, and in his place. And that's the lesson that David's learning here. He's learning that he can trust the Lord, and that the Lord will bring down David's enemies, but he'll do it at his time and in his place. So David trusts the Lord. And he knows, verse 12, the Lord judge between me and thee. The Lord avenge me of thee. I'm trusting my God. I don't need to take matters into mine own hand. The Lord will do that. He'll bring you down at the right time. You know what happens. Saul dies in battle, and then David will become king in due course. But he trusts the Lord for this time. This is the Lord's anointed. David will not lift his hand against the Lord's anointed. And there's another lesson there. It's a very solemn thing when somebody has been called of the Lord to a particular task. We need to be very respectful of that. The Lord has called a missionary, a pastor, a Sunday school teacher, an officer. The Lord has appointed them, and we therefore need to respect the Lord's anointed, the Lord's chosen, the Lord's appointed. And so David is going to say here, and he's going to reason with Saul. But I don't want to too much focus on this. I want to come down to verse 16. And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. Crocodile tears. This isn't genuine at all. Saul feels sorry for himself. He's caught up in the pathos and the drama of the moment. Saul lifted up his voice and wept. Oh, David, oh, you've been so kind. You're far more righteous than I am. You've kept my life. You've shown me good. I wanted to show you evil, but you've shown me good. Ah, don't worry. A leopard can't change its spots. Saul will go back to his old ways. It won't be long before he puts the spear in his hand again and he wants to destroy David. We should always be very careful of those that shed tears. Let's see the fruit. Let's see if there's really a change in life. I can remember in the Billy Graham mission years and years ago in the 1980s, a school friend went forward and signed the card and was in floods of tears, and it was weep, weep, weep. But there was no change in his life. He carried on just as he was. They were not genuine. He wept. He lifted up his voice. It seems as a change of heart, but it's not real. We must be careful before we make judgments. Or so-and-so's been converted. Have they? Let's wait. Let's see the evidence. Let's see the change in their life. Well, we go on and we see that the Lord is with David. But let's come right down to the end of the chapter before we go back to some application. It says here, after Saul has said all his words, look what David does in verse 22. David gave Saul the promises that Saul asked for him. What were those promises? That David would remember Saul's house. And those of you that are familiar with the wider context, there would be a relative of Saul, Mephibosheth. And one day in the years going ahead, David would ask the question, is there anybody of Saul or Jonathan's house, the same thing, that he can show kindness to? And there was. And David was remembering his covenant with Saul. He kept it. He remembered that there was somebody of Saul's house, and he would show that lame man grace. He would eat at his table for the rest of his life. He would have the land restored to him. But look at the end of verse 22. David sware unto Saul, and Saul went home, presumably back to the palace, to think. But what does David do? David goes to the stronghold. He goes to the stronghold. He's not sure that Saul has really changed his heart. You see, true faith is not naive. Yes, David's been delivered again and again. He's heard Saul's words. He's seen the tears. But David isn't fooled. David and his men gat them up unto the hold. He knows he needs to wait. He needs to wait until the kingdom comes to him. He needs to wait until Saul falls. He mustn't take matters into his own hand. He bides his time. He goes to the stronghold. So, what do we see in this whole chapter? If you stand back from it, you see a heart that trusts in God, a heart that trusts the promises of God. David knows he will become king. He is the Lord's anointed, but not yet. And how often in life we know the Lord's promise, but it hasn't yet been fulfilled. Some dear one that's not been converted. And we need to trust the Lord, and we don't need to force the matter. Some situation in life where we could go out and take the wrong job, or we could make a friendship that wasn't the appropriate one. We need to wait and trust in the Lord. Notice as well how David is treated by Saul. And don't we see again Christ? We see David hated, hounded. We see David chased. Don't we see something there of Christ? And the way he was treated by the authorities and by Judas and by those who were against him. But yet the Lord waited. Nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. He waited for the time. He waited for the promises. Well, what lessons there are here. Just want to turn you to a couple of Psalms to see this other point of how David trusted for the Lord to avenge and to bring justice. If you turn to Psalm 35 and verse 1. It's a psalm of David. I don't know whether it's referring to this particular incident or to the wider context of his life when he had many other enemies. But let's just read Psalm 35. Plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive against me. It could be Saul. Fight against them that fight against me. I'm not going to pick up the spear against Saul. I'll trust you to do that. Take hold of shield and buckler and stand up for mine help. Draw out also the spear and stop the way against them that persecute me. Say unto my soul, I am thy salvation. It would fit very well, wouldn't it, with that context? Perhaps one more. Psalm 43 and verse 1. Somewhat similar. David is again praying in this psalm, I think it's David, that God will judge his case, his cause. Judge me, O God, and plead my cause against an ungodly nation. Maybe this is referring to when he's king. O deliver me from the deceitful and unjust man. Well, that would fit with Saul. For thou art the God of my strength. Why dost thou cast me off? Why go I mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? You see David's emotions, his thinking. Here's Saul. He's against me. But I will trust. I will wait. Perhaps one more. Psalm 119 and verse 154. 119, verse 154. We see here again David pleading. Verse 154. Plead my cause and deliver me. Quicken me according to thy word. You've promised. You've given me your word. Plead my cause, deliver me and bring me to life according to the promises that you have given to me. You see, this is the heart of the believer. The believer says, I don't live by sight. I live by faith. Even in the cave, I will not take matters into my own hand. I will trust. I will wait. I will leave it to the Lord. And leave it means leave it. Will you do that? Will you wait on the Lord in prayer, in trust, in humble confidence that the Lord will answer? And where there's injustice and where those come to oppress us, we'll trust the Lord. He'll come. He'll judge the wicked. He'll judge Saul. He'll judge the house of Saul. And David will know blessing once more. We're going to close with a hymn that I think is so appropriate to this theme. It's number 754. 754, a well-known hymn. Leave God to order all thy ways, and hope in him whate'er betide. Thou'lt find him in evil days, thy all-sufficient strength and guide, who trusts in God's unchanging love, builds on the rock that naught can move. Well, may the Lord help us in these things tonight. Let's sing our closing hymn, 754.